Good afternoon. Welcome to this live broadcast of our meeting. My name is Peter Ginder, and I'm Chair of the Charter Commission. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Commissioner Boone?
Present.
Clegg?
Here.
Davis Carter?
Here.
DeMilla?
Present.
Doherty?
Here.
Garcia is absent. Hawkins is absent. Hill is absent. Kozak?
Here.
Nye?
Present.
Perry?
Here.
Sandberg?
Present.
Smith?
Here.
Vice Chair Rubenstein?
Present.
And Chair Ginder.
Present.
We have 12 present.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum, and we will now proceed to our agenda. Commissioners, the agenda for today's meeting is before us. May I please have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Perry.
Second. Sandberg.
We have a proper motion before us. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. That motion passes and the agenda is adopted. May I please have a motion to accept the minutes from our regular meeting in January and our special meeting in March?
Motion. Sandberg.
And is there a second?
Second.
Okay. We have a proper motion before us. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
That motion passes and the minutes are accepted. Next item on our agenda is the chair's report. I have one thing to report, and that is I understand the clerk's office has received a petition for a charter amendment. We will discuss that during the comments section at the close of the meeting. Our first agenda item, other than that, is the even year elections work group discussion. And our main item today is receiving and refiling a report on that even year elections work group. The staff, I understand, has prepared a presentation before that, on that, and I'll invite them now to provide this overview before we consider our work.
Good afternoon, Chair Ginder and Commissioners. My name is Katie Smith. I'm the Director of Elections and Voter Services for the City of Minneapolis. I am joined by our Deputy Director, John Martin, and we have a few slides prepared for you. We were asked to kind of summarize during work group some of the historical issues surrounding moving from an odd to an even year municipal, as well as some of the administrative pieces of what that move could look like. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to John for the first few slides.
Thank you, Director Smith. So the first slide here is municipal level turnout in the city of Minneapolis from 2001 to 2023 for all of our municipal elections. Turnout has ranged from a low of around 20% to a high of around 50 plus percent, which was reached in 2021 for the 2021 municipal election. Our most recent municipal election in 2023, turnout was around 30%. So we wanted to look at and analyze the potential impact of having our municipal elections on an even year. So on this table, we have on the leftmost, we have our turnout in presidential years from 2020 through the 1992 presidential election. The middle column in white is municipal level turnout from 2021 through 1993. And then the rightmost column in yellow is midterm turnout from 2022 to 1994. So research has shown that there's an average of about a 30% roll-off in participation down ballot in municipal races when municipal elections are on an even year. So we took that into account to estimate what turnout might look like if our municipal elections were on a presidential even year or on a gubernatorial even year. So middle column is what actual municipal turnout was for the odd year. And this is showing the roll-off for both a presidential election year and then also for our gubernatorial years. And in most cases, and really almost all cases, especially on a presidential election, even accounting for the 30% roll-off, there is higher turnout than the actual turnout in our odd-year municipal elections. And then on our gubernatorial years, the turnout tends to be slightly higher, but it is more closely aligned with our current odd-year municipal turnout. Next, this is just in graph form. So the graph on the left is tracking presidential year turnout. The graph on the right is tracking gubernatorial year turnout. And the blue line is the actual turnout for the presidential election or the gubernatorial election. The red line is what our actual municipal turnout was. And the yellow line is what that estimated roll-off of 30% is. So the gap between the blue and the red is the potential turnout, the potential opportunity cost that we have if elections were shifted, our municipal elections were shifted to either a presidential or gubernatorial year. You see that gap in a presidential year is much greater than it is in a gubernatorial year, which presents there's a greater opportunity cost in a presidential year than in a gubernatorial year. Next, I will turn it back over to Director Smith to talk some more about this.
Thank you. So there is that potential with transitioning to an even year of having higher turnout. The other kind of positive that we hear talked about a little bit is the financial savings. And it's not an entirely one-for-one. If we don't have our elections in an odd year, we save the full amount because there are other factors that play into an even year municipal, such as the weight of the ballot. So postage goes up and the staffing that's necessary. So a projection for cost savings would be about $2.5 million, and that's every 4 years, and that's because of not having that municipal in the odd year. Some of the historical challenges from when this was brought up the last time include the merging of RCV onto an even year ballot, creating some competing administrative tasks post-election. Tabulation methods of RCV are limited to a manual process. Statute and rule restrictions limit the ballots to one card, front and back. And at that time, the assistive voting devices couldn't switch between a column-style reading and a left-to-right reading. What's new this year that has changed, there's a couple of things. One is there's been a local options bill that's been being heard in both the Senate and the House. If passed, it would allow for statutory cities to have the option to implement ranked choice voting in the even years. And with that, it would provide some of the structure necessary for the tabulation equipment to be certified, as well as some additional language that would help with the needing more than one ballot card potentially because of the length of the ballot. The phrasing for that multiple ballot card allowance is located within the local options section of the ranked choice voting bill, saying that it needs to be on one ballot card if possible, and that's a change from current statute as it stands today. When it comes to that assistive voting technology, the assistive voting technology itself is the piece of equipment that's in every polling place, and it does things like zoom in on the ballot or read the ballot to someone. And historically, the equipment that was available couldn't go from reading up and down to reading left to right and then go back to up and down. And that was the issue with trying to blend together the regular column-style ballot with our row-style ranked choice voting questions. But there was a change in 2023 in the legislature that approved a new piece of equipment, and we are projected for replacement for that in Q1 of 2025. So that is now a moot point. So that's one of the things that's been resolved since this came up initially. When it comes to other pieces of equipment that would be necessary, the tabulation is software that's already available and federally certified. There isn't an all-in-one solution for tabulation. It is still a process that would happen after the close of polls or the following day. And the only other piece of equipment that would be in consideration then is the reporting piece, and that's something that John and I have worked together with a vendor on developing software for us because it doesn't currently exist. Our biggest administrative hurdles would be around ballot reconciliation, and that's mostly due to we're going to end up on more than one ballot card if we were to move to an even year. There's some administrative considerations, and then there's the challenge that comes with counteracting that down ballot voting. For ballot reconciliation, the primary challenge is with having two different ballot cards. You know, there's times when a voter might only mail back one or might only mail back card 2, and it's making sure that there's consistency in keeping those reconciled. There are 3 different options for mitigating that issue. As it stands today, it would be relying on documentation and the accounting methods of the election judges. For counteracting down ballot voter fatigue, in speaking with other agencies that already have multiple ballot cards, some of the things that they've done that have worked for them includes prioritizing vote by mail in their automatic ballot lists, because they find when people vote from home, they just have more time and they tend to go through the entire 2 cards, versus if they vote in person, sometimes they don't make it all the way to card 2. They've prioritized their voter outreach and communications efforts and specifically targeted their municipal races and the importance of filling out both cards. They've done pretty advanced media and communications campaigns and just providing continued communications support for the candidates who are running and explaining the significance of the 2 cards. In your consideration of moving either to gubernatorial or presidential years, there is something new since that was discussed last time, and that's the implementation of the presidential nomination primary, and that's going to pair with the automatic ballot list starting on June 1st of this year in 2024. So when we get to 2028, which will be the next presidential nomination primary, whenever ballots are sent out, since we don't have people's party requests on file anywhere, and since they're on the automatic list, they're going to get all of the party's ballots, and the instruction will be to send back the one that they choose to vote. So the instructions in March of a presidential year will be, whatever you do, only send back one ballot or your vote won't count. And it would be a challenge then to turn around for November and have multiple ballot cards, and our voice would have to be, please make sure you send back all of the ballot cards. So that's just something new, and it would be a communications piece if the presidential year were selected. We aren't alone in our consideration of whether to move from odd to even years, and we aren't alone in whether we're implementing ranked choice voting during a governor or a presidential race. We pulled up some sample jurisdictions. It's currently passed the House and in the Senate in 2024 for the entire state of Washington. They have RCV already and are pursuing moving to an even year. Seattle has RCV already, and the entire state is moving to an even year this year. And the state of New York passed 2023 to move to even year, and they do already use ranked choice voting. And then there's a list that you can see there as well of some other jurisdictions that are already using RCV in an even year. The next piece that would be up for you to consider would be the transition process and approval process. And I don't know if, Casey, do you want me to speak on that? Yeah. Okay. So the first step then for the transition is there's some legislative and rule changes that would need to be implemented. Those are a part of the current local options bill. Then step 2 would be a charter amendment addressing the defined changes to sections 4, 5, 6.3, and 7.1, which is the individual subsections that the election terms fall underneath of for all of the different municipal positions, and a question requiring a minimum of at least 51% affirmative votes from our qualified ballots. And then step 3 would be implementation, which the action should be completed no later than 180 days before the next regular election, so before the 2025 scheduled municipal. And I believe that's the end of our slides, but we're happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Do any members of the commission have any questions? Commissioner Sandberg.
Just a technical question as an election judge. You mentioned returning both ballot cards, which is probably will be a challenge for the mailed-in ones. But of the day of the election, are you looking to the election judges to ensure that people process both ballot cards? Because I could see how that might be an issue.
Correct. As it currently stands in statute, that would be the way that that would be addressed, would be we would need to make sure through training that our election judges are issuing out both ballot cards, and that at any point if someone doesn't want to vote one, it would need to be logged, or just the instruction to make sure that they insert both.
And just to follow up, but they could insert one that they didn't want to follow up with as a blank card, the way they can now.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Are there any other questions for staff? Seeing none, is there any further discussion by commission members on the report? And seeing no further discussion, I'll ask the clerk to file that report. And then the next item on our agenda is considering the work group's recommendation that we set a public hearing on the topic of moving municipal elections to even-numbered years. And for that, I'll ask Commissioner Clegg to give us some background and what the work group's recommendation was.
Thank you, Chair Gender. First, I'd like to thank the Elections and Voter Services Group for both their thorough presentation here and their presentation and attendance at both of our work group meetings. It's been very valuable, and I would encourage everyone to look at the LIMS file, which I don't think is physically attached, but was attached electronically to the agenda for today's meeting. After hearing the presentations and having good discussion at the work group voted unanimously to recommend that the full commission set a public hearing on even year elections without specifying whether it's presidential or gubernatorial.
Thank you, Commissioner. If I might inquire of the clerk, are there proposed dates that would be workable if the commission decides to move forward on the public hearing?
Mr. Chair, the staff doesn't have any proposed dates to offer, but would certainly stand ready to work with the commission on dates that would be available for at least a majority of the body. Happy to work with all of you. There is more time, obviously, but would be good for this body to conclude its work if it proceeds to submit a ballot question, I'd say by mid-June. And so time being of the essence, it being May 1st, it would be good for us to pick those dates.
Okay. With that background, is there a motion to have a public hearing on the issue of moving municipal elections to even-numbered years?
So moved, Perry.
Second, Sandberg.
Okay. We have a proper motion. Is there any discussion on that motion? Commissioner Smith?
I was just wondering if we would have one hearing or more than one hearing, if that's part of the motion.
I think, based on what I understand from the clerk's office, there might be the possibility of more than one motion depending on what's available. But at the current time, I think we would propose one hearing, one public hearing, and then, depending on when that is held and the nature of the turnout, we could make a decision about requesting a second hearing. I'm sorry, Commissioner Doherty.
Hi, thank you. As we discussed really in detail in our working group, this is a very complicated issue, no doubt. And there's many pros and cons, and we're not here today to make a decision about that. But one of the things I wanted to just mention briefly is in terms of providing the commission information regarding this topic, Commissioner Smith suggested that everybody read the article that the Working Commission got called Revitalizing Local Democracy, the Case for On-Cycle Local Elections. And Commissioner Perry, I'm sorry, who did I say? Oh, sorry. Commissioner Perry did that. And basically what I noticed about this article is that it is put forth by the Manhattan Institute. And I sent an article to our clerk, which was then disseminated to you all, which talked about the ideology of that commission as a incredibly conservative, corporate-funded group. And so with regard to considering this author's view that municipal election or down-ballot elections would not be negatively impacted by adding them to the even-year elections, I would just like the members of this group to take that with a grain or actually a shaker of salt, because I think despite the fact that the roll-off, as this author mentioned, was not impacted, it seems to me that we can make an assumption that in municipal election years, the people who are voting in those municipal elections are aware of the candidates and aware of the issues. And it strikes me that if those elections are added to the even years, where there are a number of people who just don't vote in the municipal elections, what will sway them, or what could sway them, is name recognition or face recognition, and that could mean the candidates who have the most money to put up the most billboards are the ones who are going to get the most votes. And that strikes me as not something that's really positive for our electoral process. So nonetheless, I'm torn by this because in my experience, the greater the turnout, from my point of view, the better the results. So I'm really interested in what the public has to say about this, but I would ask that, again, if members of the commission are considering the article put forth by the Manhattan Institute, that they take that with a grain of salt. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I do have one comment I would like to make on this is when we submit articles to the clerk for publication to the other members of the commission, the articles come in, but I think many of us, or at least I've always recognized Manhattan Group's Institute's leanings, but this is not necessarily a political body, and there are certainly articles that we receive that are from progressive or left-wing bodies, and we don't issue a warning about those. And I don't know that it's appropriate to issue a warning about the Manhattan Institute, as I would note much of what they said is in line with what is the general tenor of the articles that we've read. So my concern is to keep this as apolitical as we can on this as we discuss the articles, and we'll look at all the authors' biases as we move forward in that. Are there any other comments, questions on before we go to the motion on whether to have a public hearing? Commissioner Nye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions. So relative to this public hearing, what would be the overall goal of this hearing? What is sort of the outcome?
My understanding from the work group is that this would be a general discussion of the idea of moving to even year elections. There is not at this stage a recommendation about what year to have this actually be on the ballot, nor is there a recommendation as to whether there should be a time with the gubernatorial or the presidential election. It's more just to get the feedback from the community on whether they see this discussion is worthwhile from their perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a quick follow-up. So then relative to soliciting that feedback and having that hearing, what sort of announcement process so that community can come and share their thoughts will be put in place? Will there be, a 2-week notice at least? Will people have the opportunity to provide both written and oral comments? How does that process work? I'm the new guy here, so would just appreciate that.
I can try and take a stab at it, but I think the clerk could also do this. But there will be an opportunity. We will meet the statutory requirements necessary to have a public hearing on this. So there will be sufficient notice. And I'm not sure everywhere that this is published, but the clerk can assure us that it's widely published. And then we will also be able to take written comment as well as comments from people who show up physically to testify.
And in addition, Mr. Chair, I would just offer, we also always provide an opportunity for the acceptance of online comments that go into the record as well. So we offer an opportunity for people to show up in person and testify. We offer an opportunity for people who show up and want to be here for the hearing but not speak in person, and we have a place to accept their written comments during the hearing. And then prior to and up through the close of the hearing, we accept them online.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rubenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add, as a member of the work group, that the decision to recommend a public hearing is consistent with our practice, that it's very important for us as a body to hear from the public, that's the way we operate. And secondly, this particular issue has, in a way, very compelling reasons for and against and changing to even year elections. And so it seems particularly important not only to hear from the public, but my hope is that we'll hear from people who are planning to run for office, who are running for office, because they're going to be greatly affected by this change. And it would be very useful to us in our contemplation to hear how people feel about it. Thank you.
Other comment, Commissioner Sandberg.
And just to clarify, my own personal issue is that I would love to be able to do this via Zoom also, but I have been informed several times that that is not appropriate and will not be happening. Will it be available to look at the conduct of the public hearing on YouTube or something? Clerk Carl?
Through the chair, Commissioner, as you may know, we broadcast these meetings. And so, yes, live broadcast and on demand afterwards.
And just as a reminder, our rules do require a public hearing when we propose a charter amendment. So it's not only something good to do, but it's required for us. Any further discussion on this?
Mr. Chair, if I might. Before you vote, there was no date specified, and I can appreciate we need to find a date that would work for at least a majority of the commission and have it far enough out for the timing of giving the notice. I would suggest, with your indulgence, that we look to find a date. The soonest would be the week of May 13th. That's 2 weeks out. And the reason I say without a specified date from this body is because your meetings are broadcast. The city is limited to 2 locations. We have several bodies that's meetings are broadcast, and so we need to juggle between the 2 spaces and whichever might be available. So if you're amenable to that, I would say we should look to have at least a public hearing the week of the 13th of May, depending on availability of a majority of the body. That gives us ample time to secure the location, make sure that we have the resources needed for broadcast, to produce and issue the public notice on that. And that also gives time that if the body at the end of the first public hearing wishes, for whatever reason, have a second, we still have adequate time to schedule and call and give notice for a second one.
Commissioner Hill.
I have a question regarding the communication and how does that go out to the people? Because here's my fear that what Commissioner Doherty said, the people who are involved and active are going to be the same people who show up. But I think a lot of the people who are affected don't really get the message or don't have the opportunity or know when. So what are like the ways that we are communicating not only with the people, but through, other organizations to get the message out there so we can get the broad message, so we can have as many people impacting and showing up to the public hearing?
Through the
Mr.
chair,
Carl.
it's a very good question, and I can share with you sort of the standard practices that my office follows in terms of providing notice. So our office will work to produce a notice. We'll make sure that notice is legally sufficient by working with the city attorney's office, and then we partner with the city's communications department, the city's neighborhood and community relations department to post those through all of the city's channels. So a notice would be posted on the city's TV station. There'd be something through NCR, through our cultural radio programming. Notice would go out to neighborhood organizations through their contacts, and they could use that time to further amplify those messages. Happy to share that with this body, and you can share that through your networks and contacts as well. And so I think there are a variety of ways for us to produce a notice and then send it to a lot of folks who can help to amplify the message and spread that to different parts of the community.
Commissioner Nye.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up. What languages will those be translated into?
Obviously, we do that in English, and anything that the city has a policy on, I don't even remember what the language is, but essential information that has to go out must be translated into our 3 recognized languages, so Spanish, Hmong, and Somali at minimum.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hill.
Just to follow up to that, is 2 weeks sufficient for communication?
From my experience, the answer is yes. And the requirements for most meetings are substantially less than that. But I know that Mr. Carl indicated we'll look at this quickly and try and, for example, we set the meeting in the week of May 13th, which I think would be the goal. We'll try to get that out as quickly as possible so that people have more than a few days' notice that this is coming up. Commissioner Sandberg.
And are we looking at a 4 p.m. meeting time, 6 p.m.? I remember when we had redistricting, we did it at some slightly different times, but what's your preference? I'm fine with 4.
My recommendation would be 4, and I'll open it to others, but it also makes it easier for staff to televise and get it out for people too, if we want to televise it. So, Commissioner Clegg.
I was just going to suggest we leave that to the chair to work with the clerk's office and come up with scheduling. It'll be dependent upon availability of the filming crews in the rooms, so.
Commissioner, go ahead, please. I'm sorry. Davis Carter, I'm sorry.
I do ask clerk or whoever's going to do the schedule, just keep in mind that individuals do work, and that 6 o'clock hour may be a little bit better, or that 4 o'clock hour, especially if we're talking about the BIPOC community, and that's what I'm hearing, that's going to be affected with this. So if we can kind of keep that in mind, because we are here to support the residents of Minneapolis, and the shift has changed, that it's more people of color that live in Minneapolis that vote. So if we can keep in mind the hours that we're going to have this public hearing, so we can get that communities of color out to have their voice heard as well, please.
Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins. Okay. Commissioner Rubenstein.
Just a question. Is there any reason why we can't keep the comment period open after the hearing for people to submit written comments?
Through the chair, I would say at some point the commission needs to close the public comment hearing and that period. Does it have to be the night of the meeting? No. You could keep that open until an adjourned meeting, and at some point you'll close that and say this is the totality of comments that we have received.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Nye.
I'm sorry, if I could just make a suggestion, Mr. Chair. I know, and I might be just speaking for myself and Commissioner Kozak, when I say that the legislature adjourns on May 20th, and there are a lot of issues at the legislature that a lot of people in various communities are following. So I don't know if it makes sense to wait until the week of the 20th so that folks can focus on those issues and then have the opportunity to really sit down and think about what an even year election might mean, and just have that extra few days to put their comments together. Just a suggestion, and it might just be for Commissioner Kozak and myself, but.
Well, Commissioner, that's, I think, probably a good suggestion, because depending on what happens to the legislature, this may become moot. and there may not be a need for a public hearing. So when I talk with the clerk's office, we'll try to keep that in mind pending what happens at the legislature. Commissioner Kozak.
That's a helpful suggestion, although I go along with what Commissioner Hawkins said, that if you schedule this closer to the evening, less chance that you and I are going to have any real conflicts. And I must say that the last week of the session, those of us who work over there, we have less influence than we have any other week. The big shots make all the decisions and make sure that, and they keep themselves isolated from people like us.
Thank you, Commissioner. I don't see any further discussion.
So, Mr. Chair, can I just clarify?
Yes.
The motion is then to authorize the chair to work with the clerk to identify a date or dates for a public hearing the week of May 20th through 24th, starting around 6:30 p.m., for the purpose of requesting public input on the proposal to transition to even-yeared municipal elections.
I think that's a more than fair recap of the discussion. So with that in mind, maybe we can have the clerk call the roll.
Commissioner, Commissioner Boone,
Aye.
Clegg,
Aye.
Davis Carter,
Aye.
DeMillo,
Aye.
Doherty,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Kozak,
Aye.
Nye,
Aye.
Perry,
Aye.
Sandberg,
Aye.
Smith,
Aye.
Vice Chair Rubenstein,
Aye.
Chair Ginder.
Aye.
We have 13 ayes.
That motion carries. The next item on our agenda is public comment. And I know that we do have at least something from the clerk's office, so I'll ask Mr. Carl to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Hopefully at your space you have a memo from me to you dated today informing you that at 11:30 approximately this morning, just before noon, my office was served with a petition pursuant to Minnesota Statutes 410.12, Subdivision 1, which proposes an amendment to the city charter from a petition. It seeks to create a 13-member elected body called the Civilian Police Accountability Commission. That commission would have the following duties and powers. One, it would have authority to determine all policies and general operations of the Minneapolis Police Department. Two, it would have authority to conduct investigations into policeman misconduct allegations and to discipline officers. And three, it would have authority to exercise full control over the department's personnel, including the power to appoint, commend, discipline, or discharge the chief of police and any officers or employees subject to civil service rules. I've given you the website where you can find out much more details about the proposal by this Citizens Petition Committee. Our Elections and Voter Services Division has been doing double duty today. They also received that petition, and they have begun the process of validating signatures, or they will begin that process of validating signatures tomorrow. The process by statute is for this body to receive it formally, and we have a form for the chair to sign on behalf of the body to recognize it was received today. As provided in statute, a valid petition must carry the signatures of qualified voters totaling at least 5% of the total number of ballots cast in the last previous state general election. So based on the total number of ballots that were cast in the city of Minneapolis in 2022 for the gubernatorial general election, the petition must have at least a minimum of 8,943 valid voter signatures. Petitioners claim to have more than 10,000. I've provided in this memo a summary of both the procedural checks and the substantive checks that apply to citizen petitions for charter amendments for your review. And then, as noted at the bottom, the process begins with the clerk validating that petition. Our initial review, as I said, will begin tomorrow. We have 10 calendar days to complete that. I have full faith that we will be able to complete that review early next week and report to the City Council whether or not that first count finds the petition to be sufficient. If it is sufficient, it moves to the City Attorney for a legal analysis before it goes to the full City Council. If, however, the initial review by the clerk finds the petition to be insufficient, that means not having enough valid voter signatures, the petitioners will be given a report that identifies every error, line by line, in their petition, and they will have a total of 10 additional days to cure any defects that have been identified. At the conclusion of that additional 10-day period, the clerk has 5 days to review any additional signatures or corrections to the petition. If the petition is then cured through that additional effort, the process proceeds as I described, going to the city attorney for a legal review. If not, the petition is deemed to fail. Within that broad outline of the next steps, I would also share with you that under the statutory provision, the deadline for citizen petitions proposing ballot questions is 17 weeks before the date of the general election, which means all of the work on the petition must be completed, including a resolution by the mayor and council to set the language that actually appears on the ballot before July 9th. And the last meeting that the city council has prior to that deadline is June 27th. So it's a fairly tight turnaround time. Hopefully you also have at your desks a copy of our guide to amending the city charter. If you have questions to reference to that guide, that's my report, Mr. Chair, and would seek a motion from you to acknowledge receipt and authorize the chair to sign the receipt form, and we will begin the counting process tomorrow. Happy to stand for questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. And I would note that since this petition is, or this charter amendment is under 1,000 words, there is nothing for us to do as a charter commission except to transmit it. So whether we think it's a good idea, bad idea, there's no summary to write, our job is to transmit it to the city council. And so with that, as Mr. Carl indicated, I would ask for a motion to transmit this to the city council and authorize me to sign off on the receipt form for the city.
So moved. Doherty.
Second?
Second, Rubenstein.
Okay. Any further discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Commissioner Boone,
Aye.
Clegg,
Aye.
Davis Carter,
Aye.
DeMillo,
Aye.
Doherty,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Kozak,
Aye.
Nye,
Aye.
Perry,
Aye.
Sandberg,
Aye.
Smith,
Aye.
Vice Chair Rubenstein,
Aye.
Chair Ginder.
Aye.
We have 13 ayes.
That motion carries. Next, we do have Steve Brandt on the Board of Estimate and Taxation, who was asked to speak during this public comment period.
Good afternoon. Some of you may remember me if you're a graybeard on the commission from the early part of the teens when I covered your meetings as a reporter for the Star Tribune. I've now been retired for 7 years, and I'm serving as president of the Board of Estimate and Taxation and one of the 2 directly elected members of the board. I'm not here today speaking officially for the board. When I checked your meeting schedule on LIMS a few months ago, it appeared that there weren't any meetings of the full commission at which I could testify until September, and obviously that is a more fluid situation than I anticipated, so I'm going to bring the items I'm going to talk to you about today before the commission, for the board rather, for an endorsement. The 2 matters I'd like to bring to you are proposed charter changes I would suggest be put on the ballot for 2025 if the Charter Commission so desires. The first one would expand the Board of Estimate and Taxation to 7 members by adding a 3rd public member. Even though the board has not addressed this item formally, I've had enough informal conversations with its members to be reasonably confident that at least 5 of the 6 members would support that change. City Council President, as you know, one alternative is for the City Council to ask the Charter Commission to study putting that on the ballot, and the City Council President has indicated to me that he would be amenable, he thinks a majority of the council would support that request. The second item is to change the name of the board to more accurately reflect its modern-day duties. So I'll address the first one. Why add a 7th member, and why should that person be elected? The Board of Estimate is the only elected body in Minneapolis with an even number of members. City Council has 13. The school board, the park board have 9 apiece. You're not elected, but you have 15. And the Board of Estimate has 6. Now, that's a hangover from the demise of the library board, which some of you may remember. But it's important because when there are ties, we have no way to resolve them. And there are a couple of examples from the first half of my term, 22 and 23. The board deadlocked over a proposal to return to historical precedent and return to a full-time executive secretary. Some of you may remember Jack Qualley, who served in that position for 38 years. We split on a tie vote, and that was after experimenting with a half-time position and finding that it had little ability to retain people for the long term, which cost us institutional memory. There was also a proposal that I brought forward that came actually from somebody with more financial acumen than I have to front-load some of the debt issuance from 2023 to 2022 on a continuing capital program that exists mainly in the utility area to avoid the Fed's planned interest rate hike. And that one did not actually come to a vote, but had it come to a vote, it would have failed on a tie vote. This is not a new item for some of you on the board. Some of you may remember when a board member came before you in about 2016 and made a similar request. At that time, the Charter Commission turned to the League of Women Voters for its opinion, which in my opinion sort of stacked the deck because the League of Women Voters historically has opposed having a Board of Estimate and Taxation. But that's a position that the voters, as you know, rejected by a 2-to-1 margin back in 2009. So my question is, if we're going to have a Board of Estimate and Taxation, why not make it more effective by having a mechanism to resolve ties? Now, historically, the Board of Estimate was authorized in 1919 by the legislature. I've gone back and reviewed the legislative history, and it had 3 jobs: to authorize borrowing, to set the annual tax limit, and also to coordinate department budget estimates, which apparently were in something of a disarray back then when we had a part-time city council. Now, the original bill that was passed by the Senate did have a board that would have been 9 members with 4 public members, so a greater proportion awarded to the public, intending to give the public, obviously, that voice. And that was approved by the Senate, and only after the City Council, which had fallen down on the job of budgeting in the first place, lobbied the House to work for a 7-member board with 2 public members, did it revert to its present form, at least until the library board went out of existence. A 7th member would also expedite the resolution of any city council or park board disputes over the size of the levy. Now, I'll grant that there haven't been, in recent history, those sorts of disputes, but I think in part that's because of the even numbers. There's essentially a 3-person city hall block and a 3-person block of the park board and public member. It would also, giving a 3rd elected member would give the public a greater role in what is the prime purpose of the Board of Estimate and Taxation outside its charter specified duties, and that is to look over the shoulder of those who serve full-time at City Hall, to review their decisions on matters of taxing and borrowing. Now, the second item that I would like to bring before you is ask you to consider is a name change to more accurately reflect the Board of Estimate and what it does. I found in campaigning that few people can tell you what the name of the board I was campaigning for was. They might get taxation or they might get estimates, but they rarely got the whole thing. We don't spend much time on budget estimates, really. That function apparently has eroded over time. We have two duties. We must authorize any bonds issued by the city, and we must set the maximum tax levy. So I would suggest a name that more accurately reflects those duties, something on the order of the Board of Debt and Taxes, might be easier for the public to remember. So that's the presentation I have. I'm plan to go back to the board and ask them to adopt a formal resolution to support these positions. But if you have questions, I'd answer them now, or I can defer to a later point.
Thank you, board member. I don't think that anybody on this commission is well-versed at this moment to talk to you about this, except maybe a few of us that have had experience with the board over our professional career. And so my recommendation at this point, I think, is I would ask for a motion just to refer this to our Amendment Review Committee. For background, we have looked at this issue several times over the last probably 15 years, including what Mr. Brandt mentioned, the year was up for election to disband the board, as well as when we looked at it, whatever it was, 6 or 7 years ago when the League of Women Voters was on it. So that would be my thought at this time, just refer to the Amendment Review Committee. Commissioner Kozak.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Second. Any discussion on Commissioner Sandberg?
I was just wondering, you said you had spoken with the president of the city council. Did they have any ideas that it might pass by 13-0 vote by the city council?
That would be, I think, too optimistic, given the state of the council these days.
Well, it seems like it's never mind. Okay.
Perhaps the name change could.
That's what that would be the one. Okay. Just curious.
Okay. I have to ask this, Mr. Brandt. Is there a down ballot issue on this, even in a municipal election? Do voters drop off when they get down to the Board of Estimate?
Absolutely. I did the calculations when I ran, and it was about a 1/3 drop off and from the vote for mayor. Mm-hmm. And I made an effort, put out a video, tried to explain what the Board of Estimate does and get out and talk to people. And in the 21 election, it was still a 1/3 drop off.
Thank you. Yes. Microphone.
Mr. Brandt, and I should know this, was your election, the election for the Board of Estimate and Taxation, ranked choice?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Seeing no further discussion, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Commissioner Boone,
Aye.
Clegg,
Aye.
Davis Carter,
Aye.
DeMillo,
Aye.
Doherty,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Kozak,
Aye.
Nye,
Aye.
Perry,
Aye.
Sandberg,
Aye.
Smith,
Aye.
Vice Chair Rubenstein,
Aye.
Chair Ginder.
Aye.
We have 13 ayes.
That motion carries. Is there anyone else here to speak during the public comment period? Anyone else? Seeing none, with that, all the business has come before the Charter Commission that we had scheduled, and without objection, we'll stand adjourned. Ooh, first time ever.